Super Mario Bros. 2 is an odd game. If you look up reviews for Super Mario Bros. 2 today, it's almost impossible to find one that doesn't mention how weird it is. But while its unique identity isn't perfect, its influence in the franchise is undeniable, especially compared to actual outliers like Mario teachers typing. But when I was young, I was one of those kids that did not care. Mario was Mario through and through. And if we're talking about Super Mario Bros. 2 for the NES and the all-stars of its glory, this game is a wonderful piece of weird video game history that is iconic, impactful, and most importantly, very fun. Hey everyone, and welcome back to an all-new episode of the Completionist New Game Plus, the show where I am recompleting the original 120 games that I ever featured here on this channel. You know them, you love them, it's me, Chris Pratio. I mean Mario, sorry. I got the trailer on my mind. Today, we're going back to one of Mario's earliest entries, Super Mario Bros. 2, specifically the Mario All-Stars version. Now, for those of you who did not know, I used to do episodes every 10 videos or so where I would take a game, one game from a anthology or collection pack. And one of the first ones we ever did here on the channel was the Mario All-Stars collection. So, as we're winding down New Game Plus, I thought it was time to finish out some of these last entries we've lined up. So with that said, welcome to Super Mario Bros. 2!
Hey Gerard, did you know that Mario Bros. 2 wasn't originally a Mario game?
Of course I did. Any real gamer knows that, and I, of course, am a certified gamer.
Hey Gerard, it was actually called Doki Panic because it was a different game. Nintendo changed it because the real Mario Bros. 2 was considered too hard for gamers.
Ah, I see that you haven't seen my certified gamer card.
Anyway, so because of that, they reskinned Doki Panic as Mario Bros. 2, and it was considered canon. So that's why we have Shy Guys and Birdos and whatnot.
I told you guys I know all of that already! Look, all the internet knows this. It's a meme, all right? It's been a decade since I first completed this game for the show. And everyone on the internet knows about Doki Panic. A lot has changed about the show, my opinions on the game, and gaming as a whole. So let's get into it and see what's new in Super Mario Bros. 2 All-Stars. Not Doki Panic.
And the battle continues. This could turn it all around. This bout will determine who is the strongest once and for all.
If you've been in the Mario fandom for a while now, you probably know the ye old story that Super Mario Bros. 2 is a reskin of the Japanese game Doki Panic because the original Japanese version of Mario Bros. 2 was deemed too difficult for Western audiences. Japan's Super Mario Bros. 2 was released to us as the Lost Levels, and instead, the Super Mario Bros. 2 we received was a drastically different experience. Like I said earlier, everyone knows this, but it always makes me laugh when I see people talk about this both ironically and unironically. The game takes place in the dream world of Subcon, where Goombas, Koopas, and even Bowser wasn't present at all. If you jump into an enemy's head, you just go for a ride on top until you pick them up and throw them. We did have mushrooms, but these were used to extend our Zelda-like health bar, and instead, health was often given back in the form of floating hearts. This was also the first Mario game where you could play as completely different characters from Mario and Luigi, and they all felt unique to play as. Nowadays, it's the same as it is in the more contemporary games like Super Mario 3D World. Mario is balanced, Luigi jumps higher but can feel a bit slippery on the ground, Toad's the chonkiest in terms of health hits and fastest overall, and Peach, my favorite, can float. Regardless of these jarring differences, Super Mario Bros. 2 was pretty well received on its release. The game was one of the top-selling games in 1988, and by 1999, it was the fourth best-selling title on the NES. It wasn't until Super Mario Bros. 3 came out that we started seeing more negative takes on Mario Bros. 2. Total Magazine reviewed Mario Bros. 2 in 1992, and they said, if you'd never seen Super Mario Bros. 3 before, you'd think this was brilliant. In 2007, Eurogamer remarked that it only had vague continuity with the official series. So when I first played Super Mario Bros. 2 for the show, I played the version from the All-Stars pack for the Super Nintendo. Along with the graphical and musical upgrades, the All-Star version added quality of life updates, including a new controller control scheme to match the Super Nintendo, a save feature, and the ability to reselect a character after dying. Now, the Game Boy Advance version added a few more changes, like voice lines for all 4 characters, more health drops, and a post-game challenge where you collect Yoshi eggs. However, I am going to be playing the All-Stars version once again, since it's my favorite release of Super Mario Bros. 2. It's also because that was the one I originally did this pack collection review set on, and if you look at my previous episodes, the games from that collection are all from the Super Mario Bros. All-Stars pack. When I first completed Super Mario Bros. 2 on the All-Stars pack, despite a fairly simple completion process, I originally gave the game a play it rating. But looking back, I'm not sure why. If I had to guess, that was back in the early days of the show where I really thought that play it, finish it, complete it, look at it, donate it, all had their own variance point systems. So in my mind, play it was a pretty good score. But in actuality, what really came from it was defining the difference between beating a game or completing a game. I mean, all a player had to do was to get to the end and not use any warps as far as I'm concerned. There aren't any secret bosses, just 6 worlds, each with 3 stages, and a final 7th world that only has 2 stages. Regardless, the completionist criteria was the same this time around. Just get to the credits. Let's see how a decade of gaming has shaped my opinion of this title.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Today's sponsor, as you guys aren't going to be surprised by, is G Fuel. As all of you guys know, G Fuel are the homies. They have been sponsoring the show for many, many years, and we appreciate them. For those of you not in the know, G Fuel is an energy formula that you mix with your water, or if you're ambitious enough, you can use milk for your tea type of flavors. It does have sugar. There is caffeine in here. It's a great alternative to soda if you're trying to keep the pounds down, or just a different taste, different flavor. And there's also flavors that do not have sugar. So if you're trying to keep it real lean, you totally can. And hey, they come in a can, they come in powder forms, they come in all different shapes and sizes. And of course, you gotta get that shaker so you can shake it all up. I've got a bunch of different flavors. In fact, we've got too many flavors in the office, some would say. We drink a lot of this stuff. But with that said, if you want to pick up some G Fuel, you can head over to gfuel.com right now and use code Completionist on checkout. For the rest of this month, and the rest of this month only, it's 30% off. So usually we do like a couple days sale for G Fuel with our code. This month and the rest of the month is going to be 30% off. Again, gfuel.com, use code Completionist on checkout. Thank you guys for watching. Back to the show.
At this point, as the completionist, I've learned a thing or two about how to make it through some of these classic games as quick as possible. Each character in Mario Bros. 2 has their own strengths and weaknesses, which brought unique challenges and exploits to each level. For example, Peach may have the weakest speed, throwing strength, and jump height in comparison to the rest of the cast. However, this game introduced her now infamous float. It offers a lot of air control that makes most of the levels fairly safe. It was a huge advantage to have when landing on enemies' heads. As I mentioned before, landing on an enemy's head doesn't flatten them and instead has you go for a ride atop their head. It's only when you throw them into another enemy or throw something into them that you can then clear them off the stage. For some folks, the pace of picking up a vegetable from the ground and throwing wasn't snappy enough to be a Mario game, but I didn't find it sluggish by any means. In fact, grabbing a Shy Guy, lining up your shot, throwing him into another enemy, and watching those hits chain together was always incredibly satisfying. Plus, between all the variety of enemies like Sniffits, Hoopsters, and Tweeters, there was a lot to assess and work around to stay alive. On top of that, environments offered unique obstacles to overcome as well. I had to use the pickup ability to dig through desert sand, use the Pigot's magic carpet to traverse wide gaps, and unlock doors with keys, all while avoiding the Phantos swooping down whenever I actually held a key, which, let's be honest, we didn't know they were called Phantos until we beat the game, and at the end of the day, that doesn't change the fact that these things are still scary as hell all these years later. There was also a bunch of items you could grab. The most famous was, of course, the turnips, but there was also stopwatches that freeze enemies, POW blocks, and my favorite, the magic potions. Throwing one of these down on the ground would open a door to the subspace, which was a temporary zone where you could pluck the grass and collect coins and find mushrooms, which gave you extra heart containers. Now, coins were only found in the subspace area and were used to spin a roulette at the end of a stage to earn more lives. The section of the subspace that you explored was a mirrored version of the screen where you threw down the potion, so there was a bit of an element of exploration that came game with throwing down a potion and seeing what you'd find in different areas. Now, as a young kid, you can bet your ass that all I did for a very, very long time was start the game, grab a potion, drop it somewhere I thought was cool, get the items, reload the game, grab the potion, go somewhere else that was also cool, and do it all over again. That's how at a young age I figured out where all of the coins and mushrooms were, because on the NES version, there is no way to save. So for me, I took a lot of extra notes. I was that one kid who wrote in the notes part of a manual. And all the items and enemies that inhabit all of the levels are interesting. The design and direction isn't as cohesive as Super Mario Bros. 1 or 3, but it is not bad by any means. Let's take World 4, the ice theme world for instance. In Stage 1, you are jumping over whales to navigate a frigid ocean. In Stage 2, you are traversing a typical ice level before grabbing a rocket ship and flying into the sky for the second half of the level. And the final stage is half in a frozen tundra and half in an ice castle, where the final boss is a fiery enemy named Fry Guy. A fiery enemy in the ice world isn't unheard of, but it's less conventional than the theming that we're used to in modern Mario games. Needless to say, if we're comparing what became before it and what we had here, Super Mario Bros. 2's environments and level designs were way more clever and interesting than the original Super Mario Bros. 1. The other notable design choice in Mario Bros. 2 was their use of verticality in the game. The very first thing you do when you start World 1 is fall from the sky, and it ends with a long climb to the boss of the stage. Super Mario Bros. 1 was all about running to the right, and while there was a decent amount of verticality in Super Mario Bros. 3 and World thanks to items like the Tanuki suit and the feather cape, they were never as extreme as Super Mario Bros. 2. Nowadays, vertical levels are super common, but this was the franchise's first serious foray into this kind of gameplay style. The one notable downside to the taller sections was how the level loaded in segments when traveling up or down. Now, initially, the stuttering may have been a technical limitation of the NES, but the choppiness persisted on in the All-Stars and Advanced ports. And although the climbing in these sections weren't as smooth as I would have liked them to have been, they had their charm. But regardless of whether I was traveling up, down, left, or right, each stage ended with a boss fight. The iconicness of Birdo was born right here with this game. But as someone who has played this game multiple times since I was a kid, this little boss fight and most of the boss fights are really easy. The basic gist of each boss fight in the game is to take their projectiles or something in the environment and throw it right back at them a couple of times. Attack patterns aren't that complex, so learning their moves and where to stand wasn't that hard. Birdo was probably the most memorable boss in the game. Now, they were technically a mini boss, but we saw them so often, and they were the only one to receive any amount of iteration to their attacks. They either shot eggs, fireballs, or an assortment of both. And that is more than what can be said for the other bosses. Some of them are creative, where you use bombs or whatnot to attack the bosses, but most of the time it was catch the collectible, pick up the collectible, throw it back at the boss. It's probably a sizable factor why we've seen Birdo so much in modern Mario games, but the main villain, Wart, hasn't had any notable appearances since. In fact, his boss fight was probably the least exciting in the entire game. Wart's fight essentially boiled down to waiting for vegetables to spawn from the Dream Machine, and then waiting to throw them into his open mouth 6 times. It wasn't that hard, but it was fairly tedious. The lackluster final battle aside, with 7 worlds cleared and the final boss defeated, this game was over. Mario and his friends were celebrated by the denizens of Subcon, and we see that it all took place in Mario's dreams. Even in a minimalist narrative like a Mario game, that's a fairly underwhelming ending if you ask me. As you just saw, the ending to Super Mario Bros. 2 isn't anything to write home about. It's ambiguous whether the opening text crawl all happens before the game, or if waking up from the dream to visit a cave happens after the game. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The plot of mainline Mario games rarely delves into more complexity than saving the princess anyways. The actual game itself is a mixed bag of mostly great gameplay. The level designs, I would say, is more polished than Super Mario Bros. 1, but not nearly as polished as Super Mario Bros. 3. It did lay the groundwork for a lot of the franchise's identity going forward. It experimented a lot with the diversity of the cast and how they play. And as anyone with a certified gamer card would know, enemies like Shy Guys, Bob-ombs, and Pokies would all go on to become iconic staples of Mario's baddie roster. Now, I may have only given the game a play it when I first completed the game for the show, but that was probably my opinion getting caught up in the trend of questioning the game's legitimacy as a true Mario game. I was also only a dozen or so episodes in when I first completed the game, and I hadn't really understood what the completionist rating meant at the time. Sometimes quality is quantity. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense. When I re-completed Super Mario Bros. 2, the All-Stars Pack version, there were 3 hours of total playtime, 7 worlds cleared with 0 skips to use. Now let's be clear, there are skips in this game. I did not use them because I live streamed the show and I wanted to make sure that it was a good time for everyone who watched, and we saw every single thing the game had to offer. 14 individual encounters with a type of birdo. And one neat fact about this game. Did you guys know that Super Mario Bros. 2 wasn't originally a Mario game? It was a game called Doki.
Super Mario Bros. 2 might come out of left field if you go in expecting the standard Jumpman affair, but that shouldn't undermine how fun this game is. The game gets a lot of flack for being such a weird outlier in the catalog of early Mario titles, but in retrospect, its identity as a real Mario game shouldn't have been questioned. So much of this game's identity has informed the personality of the Mario franchise. And although I don't expect to see an obscure enemy like a hoopster in this game, I'd be surprised if we see some references that originated in this game somewhere out there in the Mario universe. So with that, I give Super Mario Bros. 2, the All-Stars Pack Edition, my new completionist rating of completed. And the reason why? The quality of this game is top-notch, regardless of its limitations. Thanks for watching, and see you all soon. Bye.